If everybody could take their seats, please, we'll be starting in a minute. Thank you so much to everyone joining us. We will be starting shortly. The C40, CAF, Solar Power, and CCAG side events. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Third time's a charm. Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to all of you to our panel discussion today on delivering a just energy transition, and specifically the role of cities in addressing the climate and inequalities crisis. So this event, delighted to say, has been organized by C40 Cities, the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, and Solar Power Europe, in partnership with our great friends, the Climate Crisis Advisory Group. I'm Cassie Sutherland, and I'm the Managing Director for Climate Solutions and Networks at C40, and I'm your glamorous host for today. But luckily, we've got much more glamorous speakers who are going to join us on the panel and virtually as we head through this session. So with this exciting set of speakers, we're going to dive into some of the key actions that cities, finance, and energy stakeholders are taking to deliver a fair and equitable energy transition. We know that there's a huge amount of challenges that cities and others are facing, namely the climate crisis, the cost of living crisis, fueled by rising and volatile energy prices everywhere. And we know that further fossil fuel exploration, in particular of gas, is sometimes promoted as the solution to improve energy access and tackle energy supply chain issues. But what we really know is that this will lock us into continued reliance on fossil fuels and continue to expose people to the volatility of energy prices, exacerbate energy poverty and economic insecurity. So today, our speakers are going to be inspiring you with a number of examples of how cities are taking the lead in supporting a just transition and making a joint call on national governments, on the finance community, to support them in these efforts by rapidly increasing investment in renewable energy and good green jobs in cities. So we're going to kick off today with a couple of great keynote speeches. And it is my honor to introduce our first speaker, who is Sir David King, who's going to be joining us virtually, all technology allowing, but I think we're looking pretty good. And Sir David King, as many of you will know, is the chair of the Climate Crisis Advisory Group and the UK government's former chief scientific advisor. Previously, he held the position of the UK government's Permanent Special Representative for Climate Change, and he was the government's Chief Scientific Advisor from 2000 to 2007, during which time he raised the awareness of the need for governments to act on climate change and was instrumental in creating the Energy Technologies Institute. So David will open our event today with a keynote intervention on the urgency of taking action towards a good and just energy transition. So Sir David, over to you.
Cassie, thank you so much. I hope I'm coming across and you can hear me.
Sorry, Sir David, we can't quite hear you yet. Just bear with us a second.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let's just give it a moment. Give it a go now, Sir David, see if we get on.
Okay.
So,
Am I on?
sorry about this, just one more moment. Just having a bit of trouble with the audio. If it carries on anymore, Sir David, I'll tell a joke or something. Don't worry, it'll be all right in a second. Oh gosh, that joke's really going to have to come to me in a moment, isn't it? How are we getting on? Another couple of minutes. Okay, well, before we head off, I won't open with a joke, but I will talk a little about some of these real crises that our cities are facing and how we know that at the moment, as prices are rising and rising and rising, we're really seeing our mayors, but also governments, really finding a challenge in facing and tackling climate action. So I'm hoping, Sir David, you can now hear us or speak.
Can you hear me?
Hey, great news, we can hear you. Fantastic. Thank goodness you're there. Over to you.
Cassie, thank you so much, and thank you for the patience. I'm going to say, first of all, that I need to define terms. I'm going to be talking about what will make the energy transition both orderly and just. So first of all, the easier definition, just, because this was defined within the Paris Agreement. A just transition is one in which we stay below the 1.5 degrees centigrade target, and that is the target above the pre-industrial level. So there's a just transition, and it means just because it creates a manageable future for humanity. However, the orderly transition is a more complex issue because it implies the maintaining and strengthening of reliability and security of supply, as well as maximized sharing of information and technology around the globe. An orderly transition effectively leaves no one behind. Now let's just take a look at what will need to be done. First of all, the costs of the global energy transition are significant, but compared with the profits generated by the oil sector are modest. The oil sector has, we are told, been making $3 billion a day for some 50 years. And the costs are becoming modest in comparison to the annual costs of extreme weather events occurring worldwide. In other words, if we can act, we avoid the loss and damage caused by these extreme weather events. Unfortunately, oil sector profits have funded the fossil fuel lobby with messages of delay and denial, but there's now very little time to act to avoid an unmanageable future for humanity. Nothing should distract from the absolute urgency of the task in hand and the need to start, of course, from where we are. There have been efforts in the past to make a more conscious order in the energy transition process. Think only of the Kyoto process, which was a top-driven process, and that was abandoned in favor of the current system of transparent commitments to self-determined action, aiming for convergence on the global transition required. Now, this system obviously has disadvantages, but it has the advantage that we did get that agreement in Paris. Now, what isn't yet being done? Let's just have a look at that first of all. There is no system in place to organize countries into an orderly transition. Instead, each country must currently take full responsibility for its own pathway. But surely it is crucial that the wealthiest nations, which have done the most, of course, to cause climate problems, must carry the greatest financial responsibility. The challenges ahead are not easy, but the world must maintain a relentless focus, making the best of events as we find them. Let me just move on with the alternatives to fossil fuel. If we're looking at how to manage this transition, we need, of course, all available levers to be pulled in different countries at different times to achieve this dramatic shift. Each country has a different set of available energy capabilities, and the energy transition demands different platforms to address its multiple dimensions. These platforms include labor, finance, research and development, governance, and decommissioning of fossil fuel systems. Some of these, of course, are already in place with rules, governance, trading, and regulatory norms capable of delivering. But finance has all of these and could perhaps drive rapid adaptation of existing systems. It is central to the energy transition process that technology, skills, and access to finance must be available across the and between different nations, industries, and innovators. Now, what is important to underline is that there are many win-wins in achieving the energy transition. Energy bills are lower, while absolute energy needs are reduced due to the need to the new efficiencies produced in the transition process. Air quality improves. Mobility in cities is safer, quicker, more dignified, and inclusive. Active lives are more easily led, and health outcomes are therefore improved, leading to vast savings in public health services. Nations experience economic growth and job creation when they build reliance on local energy supplies from solar, wind, and hydropower. Renewable energy is cheaper, safer, more localized, bringing local jobs, and more secure in the face of geopolitical change. Tipping points really need to be looked at very carefully. The concepts of adaptation and justice become meaningless in the face of destruction that will occur if the world passes certain critical weather, climate change tipping points. For example, if the West African or Indian monsoon were to fail, there's no monetary compensation that could make up for the loss. These extremities of no return are reached at somewhere between 1.5 degrees centigrade and 3 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial level. If temperature rises are not kept within the Paris Agreement range, extreme outcomes, let me emphasize this, are a certainty. And we already know that we're experiencing extreme weather events on a very wide scale around the whole world. Effective government intervention is essential to manage early use cost of any transition technology, to promote research and development activities, to encourage the behavior of changes that will deliver the energy transition to a new zero net emissions world. Funding must be made available to promote the changes globally between and within governments. The measures that drove down the costs of solar production, for example, to the point where it's cheaper today than anyone could have imagined, were direct interventions by a number of different governments at different times, feed-in tariffs, subsidies, regulatory obligations, loans, and grants. Many levers were pulled in different countries to shift production and demand patterns and effectively create a marketplace for renewable energy systems. The success of that marketplace has now driven the advantages right across the world, and the successes of diverse government interventions have been critical in that process. Let me make a comment briefly about the middle classes in India and China. If the rapidly growing middle class populations in China and India were to shift their energy use to renewables, the policies and implementation of those two huge nations will have aligned with the energy transition. This would be the clearest indicator of a global transition underway. We believe that at least these two countries show how important the energy transition really is in the emerging middle classes in these countries. Now, let me just say, if operated for typical lifetimes, sorry, I'm going to say I've just skipped a page. I'm going to really just draw my comments towards an end by referring to the recent International Energy Agency report, which I recommend to anybody to read, which deals with coal usage, continued coal usage. They point out that if operated for typical lifetimes and utilization rates, the existing worldwide coal-fired fleet, excluding those under construction today, would emit more than the historical emissions to date of all coal plants that have ever operated. And if you think about that, what you'll see is that that spells a disaster. It spells out an unmanageable future for humanity going forward in time. So we now know that we have no choice in this matter. We really have to push as hard as we can in every place, in every country, to make this transition happen. We don't any longer time on our side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir David. You've really given us a really comprehensive view there of the main challenges, but also the opportunities around the just energy transition. And it's really an absolute pleasure for us to have you today. And thanks so much for spending the time and joining us. So I'd now like to introduce our second keynote speaker, who is Steve Adler, the Mayor of Austin. And with its community-owned public municipal utility, Austin Energy, Austin is already pursuing ambitious renewable energy targets, whilst maintaining a focus on keeping energy bills affordable and supporting the most vulnerable. And we're looking forward to hearing a bit more about that from Mayor Adler, but also about the role of cities in the just energy transition. Mayor Adler.
You know, for a moment there, I thought that I would not have to follow Sir David King, but it didn't quite work out that way. I want to thank C40 for all the work that it does, putting on this session. Its annual meeting held just a couple weeks ago was again another in a series of successes, and it just really brings home, I believe, the realization that if the world is to meet its responsibilities for climate change mitigation, at least half that work is going to be done at the city level, not at the nation-state level, because it's cities that are making procurement decisions, that are deciding what mobility looks like, what their cities are deciding power generation questions. It was an honor to be at an earlier COP when the Paris Accords were signed. But what was exciting was more than just seeing the Paris Accord signed. It was being in a place that had the largest gathering of mayors in the history of the world, as I believe 800 some odd mayors signed their own pledge. And if you look at a lot of the innovation and the work that's happened in the intervening years, it's again been happening at the city level. My city is Austin, Texas. It is the fastest growing large metropolitan area in the United States and has been so for each of the last 10 years. We're creating, bringing in greater populations. The city's doubling, the metropolitan area is doubling in size every 25 years. We're creating more jobs. We're creating more housing and building more housing than any other city in our country. This really is a golden age of a magical city. But it is also a city that is in the southern part of the United States and in Texas. And because of that, it has a history and a legacy of inequities and challenges to equity that have been institutionalized and made part of the systems in our city. We saw that most recently with COVID, where our city generally did incredibly well in saving lives, but in those parts of our community that were most vulnerable, our numbers were not stellar and not something to be proud of. Same thing is true as we approach climate change and mitigation issues. Austin, like many cities, set its initial goal to be carbon-free by 2050. We've recently changed that goal to bring it down to 2040, and I anticipate moving it to 2035. We are a city that plans to be carbon-free power generation by 2035. And following the examples that we're told to set 3- and 5-year goals and not to rely on 10- and 15-year goals, so that you actually are pushing yourself to meet what needs to be done more quickly. We're going to get to 93% in 2035, 86% in 2025, and we're really close to those numbers now. We live in a city that between 2019 and 2010 to 2019, our population grew by about 25%, but our energy consumption went down by 25% in that same period of time. So we have a city that is leaning into climate mitigation patterns, but we recognize that equity and as Sir David King said, I guess, orderly issues need to take the forefront. In our city, we used to have a higher priced utility charge for those people that wanted to help underwrite and support development of new technologies for solar and for wind. And now that those technologies have advanced where that power is less expensive, that same subsidy now is going to supporting and subsidizing the people in our community that are most vulnerable, so that power in those communities costs as little as it can possibly be. We have solar programs in our city where people are putting solar on their roofs and then participating in a distributed effort to generate power in our community. But we recognize that not everybody can put power on the top of their roofs, so we develop a parallel system of community solar so that anybody in any community in our city can participate in those kinds of programs. It goes beyond just electric generation. We've sped up the completion of our All Abilities and All Ages bicycle network from something that was going to be completed in mid-2030s to something that will be completed by the end of 2025. And to no one's surprise, because the cost of operating a bicycle is what, about $600 a year compared to $11,000 to operate a vehicle, be it electric or be it a fossil fuel vehicle. The people that are most using this network are the people that are most economically challenged, because we're now providing an ability for mobility that didn't otherwise exist. In our city, we've adopted, and the voters went to the polls to approve a $8 billion mass public transit system in our community. But it was a system that was designed to ensure that 70% of the most affordable housing in our community lives within a 10 or 12 minute walk shed of a station on that system, so that it's actually helping the people that you most want to bring that kind of system and choices to, and quite frankly, those communities that have been denied those choices for such a long period of time. In that Project Connect petition program, We also put in a line item for $300 million as part of the transportation bond. $300 million to only be spent on affordable housing and dislocation issues, recognizing that when you build a system like that in pursuit, in part, of climate change mitigation goals, you run the risk of making the neighborhoods that you most want to serve near the stations some of the more expensive neighborhoods in your city, thus losing the people that you, again, are most interested in challenging and participating. We're making changes to the Land Development Code to recognize that instead of preserving neighborhood character, we should instead be focusing on preserving our neighbors. The two panels that are going to be coming up here are just wonderful panels, and we'll be talking about best practices. I really do believe that if our world is going to be able to meet the challenge of climate change, it's going to be because our cities have gotten engaged. You see that happening now. I really appreciate this seminar and the greater presence of cities, and I look forward to the day when the cities are formally recognized as participants in the COP organization and structure. Have a great seminar.
Thank you so much, Mayor Adler. It's really inspiring to hear the leadership that you're really providing as Mayor, but particularly for me, who's somebody who's interested in city actions, hearing those actions you're taking and the difference that they're making on the ground, matching both climate ambitions and equity. So a massive thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So I'm now going to introduce our next panel and our host for this panel, who is Mate Heiss, who's the Director of Global Affairs at Solar Power Europe. And if you don't know, Solar Power Europe is the award-winning link between policymakers and the solar PV value chain, with a mission to ensure that solar becomes Europe's leading energy source by 2030. So I'm going to introduce Mate, and I'm also going to mention to our panelists, learning from my own mistakes, if you want to speak, you have to press the button on the mic. It goes green, and then you turn it off again. Just giving a tip in case you need it. Mate, over to you.
Thank you very much, Cassie. And it is really a pleasure for Solar Power Europe to be a co-organizer of today's event. As mentioned by Cassie, Solar Power Europe is the association that represents the solar industry in Europe, and really the just transition is really at the heart of our activities. And it is clear that solar energy will play a key role in the just energy transition. And why is that? In very short, solar is not only the cheapest source of electricity, but is also extremely versatile. It's easy to deploy, easy to use, comes in all forms and for all needs, and moreover, it creates a lot of jobs and a lot of socio-economic value. So with this, I would like to invite our distinguished panelists for the first panel today, starting with Ms. Jutta Paulus, member of the European Parliament. Please join me here on the stage. Member of the European Parliament from the European Greens Party. Alicia Montalvo, Manager of Climate Action and Positive Biodiversity at the Development Bank of Latin America, CAF. Welcome. And Marek Haasdorff, economist at the International Labour Organization. And so in this first panel, we will be speaking about the just energy transition and what is the just energy transition. So I will join the panel over there now. Thank you, Jutta. So, and I would like to ask the first question to Jutta Paulus. The first question would be about the European Green Deal, which was announced by the European Commission and the European Union in 2019 to deliver a climate-neutral Europe and to deliver a green and just energy transition. So, in the past years, what are the lessons learned by the European Green Deal, and how is the European Green Deal delivering a just energy transition, in particular in cities?
Thank you very much. And you already addressed this issue quite well. Let's turn it the other way around. The European Green Deal should not be a European climate deal only. But at the moment, I fear that this might be the case because everyone is looking towards the ramp up of renewables, the bringing down emissions, working on the transition to a cleaner energy system, but we're not so much looking at the other parts which were also addressed in the European Green Deal, which is ending pollution, bringing back nature, a better, a more sustainable agricultural system. And these are the issues which are actually at stake right now because everyone is saying, well, we've got an energy crisis, we cannot look at anything else. So it looks quite good on the energy side. We have seen a lot of acceleration. Last week, the European Commission came forward with an emergency measure on permitting, saying the bottleneck of permitting must be broken. We must ease permitting in the member states so that everyone who wants to build a wind park can hand in a dossier, and if the dossier is complete, then this should be granted within 2 years at the most. So this would, of course, ease the procedures because right now it takes up to 7 or even 8 years to get a wind park authorized, which then poses the problem that your turbines might be outdated. So you would have to build outdated material because your authorization was granted on your proposal 8 years ago. So there are a lot of things to clean up there. We managed to raise our goal for the renewable energy in 2030. But we still have to do a lot of work in cities. I mean, the Commission now has proposed an obligation to put solar panels on every new building by 2027. We Greens would like to see that much earlier. We would also like to see it expanded to existing buildings when they are refurbished. So if you're already erecting a scaffold, well, why not put solar panels on the roof while you're at it, right? And we should do a lot about cleaning up our mobility systems because that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges. But the good thing is we have a lot of good examples all over the European Union. If you're looking at what Paris achieved within a few years only, where streets were turned from congested motorways into living space for citizens, which really also brought up quality of life and improved citizens' health. And I think these are the issues where the Commission should come forward with new proposals as soon as possible.
Thank you very much, Jutta. And may I play back the word to you once again. So the European Union is in an energy crisis. We're facing exceptionally high energy prices. Very big burden on households, but also the industry. And you already mentioned that the European Commission has put forward, for example, proposals to accelerate permitting. But what other initiatives do you see and do you think the European Union should take and is taking to address the current energy crisis?
It is a tricky issue because, of course, the European Union is not a national government. So the member states themselves have come forward with proposals on how to relieve their citizens, their industry in this exceptional situation. And Commission is actually, I might say, trying to do a bit of damage control because we have economically strong member states, but we also have economically not so strong member states, and we must avoid having a distorted competitive field. So the Commission is coming forward with, let's say, a sort of guidelines on what to do and what not to do. They are also proposing, for example, to have a taxation of the over revenues which were generated by some energy companies, and they're front-loading a lot of the money that was already in the Recovery and Resilience Fund that was set up after Corona. They were front-loading and shifting it towards investment in energy efficiency, investment in renewable energy, investment in, for example, roll-up of heat pumps, which would do a lot on bringing down emissions and also bringing down bills at the same time. So this is more a midterm development. In the short term, there are negotiations going on in the Council of Member States about a common purchase of gas and also of applying a ceiling to the gas import price, where we still don't have an agreement in Council, and the Commission is, I might say, doing their best, but of course they cannot rule the 27 member states, although sometimes they would want to. And when it comes to cities, because you're talking about cities, I think there are some very good examples in member states. For example, Spain has come forward with giving citizens free public transport in cities, which of course does a lot to the households who would have to pay for public transport else, while at the same time bringing down emissions and working towards a just society, because of course a rich household says, well, public transport, I don't use it anyway, but for a poor household this really can make a difference.
Thank you very much, Jutta. And I think the European Union's and the European Commission's and the Parliament's efforts are very much appreciated by the society, but also the industry, like Solar Power Europe. So thank you for that. So with this, I would like to move on to our next panelist, Alicia Montalvo from CAF. Welcome. So we wanted to discuss the role of gender in the just energy transition. It plays a very important role when it comes to just energy transition and ensuring that different parts of the society benefit from the energy transition equally. And I know this, my wife is a gender researcher, but this is not always recognized. So could you say a few words about the role of gender and why it is so important to keep this in consideration?
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to talk about that, because I think that we are now in a just transition COP, and we cannot speak about just transition if we don't take into account half of the population, women. And it's not only because women have to be considered in any issue, either energy or any other question, but this goes beyond the participation of women in society. The role of women related with energy is crucial. First, because especially in the most vulnerable countries and the less developed countries, women suffer especially the impact of bad use of energy. Wood is the main use of energy in kitchen in all these countries. And of course, it's not only bad for the climate change, but also for their health. So the first question is that they suffer more than anyone else the effects of bad use of energy. So I would say that this is the first reason, to take into consideration that there is an unfair use of energy, especially in vulnerable countries. Second, because the women usually are the ones taking the decisions, mostly in the less developed countries, taking the decision, or even in all countries, taking the decision on the use of energy in households. They are the ones who cook, who decide, who make use of the washing machines, etc. So it's important that as consumers, they are included in the decisions that have to be taken in any energy regulation. And I have to say that usually this is unfair metrics, because women seem to be the highest consumers of energy, and this is not true, because they are the users, because they have this role at home. So there are many questions related with the energy and women that really go deeper into the gender issue, the difference of roles, the decision making, the participation of women in the decision making institutions. So why should we take into account gender in energy? Is because not doing that will be not only against just transition, but against a good use of the energy, and also would be against the health of half of the population. So our approach is that gender in this case has to be taken into account not only for women, but for the good of the society. In general, this is the case in all the decisions that take into account gender, but in energy consumption and even in energy production, where women are not so much represented, the gender has to be included. It's key.
Thank you very much, Alicia. And before moving on to the next question, let me just add that the last point you mentioned, that women are underrepresented in the energy production, which means basically the energy industry. That's completely true. But I would like just to highlight a fun fact or an important fact. IRENA recently published data and its findings on the share of women in the energy industry, and particularly the renewable energy industry. And so the findings said that that women's share was approximately 32%, if I remember correctly. But when it comes to solar, women's share was 40%. So with this, the solar industry is really leading in terms of women employment. Of course, we are still a bit far away from 50%, but we also, as Solar Power Europe, we are making an effort to increase women's share, and we are working on a diversity strategy, for example, for our organization and our sector. But giving back the word to you, so what can organizations like yours, banks like CAF, do to support women and take gender into account in your activities in the just energy transition?
We are a regional development bank with 20 members in Latin America. We are now also increasing the membership for Caribbean countries. And Caribbean countries are really important when we talk about energy. I think that the role of institutions like CAF and other multilateral development institutions is key. First, because the questions you mentioned, the underrepresentation of women in the decision making. And it's true that our institutions play an important role for women. In particular in CAF, we recently made a capital increase, important, and this is relevant not only because we are increasing our action in green projects, but also in questions related with gender. We have created a cross-cutting unit for gender and inclusion and diversity. We are working to include all questions related with gender in all our projects from the very beginning. It's a cross-cutting element that we are considering in any action, not of course specific policies for women, but in cross-cutting element in energy infrastructures, of course, education, and even in climate change. So I think that the role of institutions like ours are really crucial. There is also a very important question which has to do with the financial inclusion, because we need to work for the empowerment of women related with the use of energy. As I mentioned before, women take many decisions related with consumption. So if we are able to give women instruments to be able to take really the decisions on how to hire energy at home, how to buy electrodomestic, how to decide on any other questions related with energy, the kind of car, if we are able to provide with financial instruments to women, probably women will be able to decide on the kind of energy they want to use. And in financial inclusion is very important in this discussion. So summing up them, I think that our role as multilateral development banks or regional banks in our case is really very important. In our case, we are very close to the countries. We work very closely with the communities, the indigenous communities, the Afro-descendant communities, and they are very, very, really vulnerable and sensitive to these questions. So I think that we have a crucial role when talking about the transition to a new energy model, but always talking about just transition, making sure that energy is affordable and is accessible. And it's green, it's clean, so this is also crucial. But I think that we should never forget that the first thing is to alleviate energy poverty.
Thank you very much, Alicia. And I think it's really important and really good that gender is becoming, or has already become, part of the mainstream international cooperation discourse. So I would like to move on to our third panelist, Marek, from the International Labour Organization. And you, obviously, the Labour Organization is about jobs. And I would like to ask you about data a little bit. So we know that the the energy transition
could create and is creating millions of jobs. But could you share some insights with us? I mean, how can the energy transition really create socioeconomic value, jobs, and what types of socioeconomic value is the energy transition creating?
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe because jobs is always the focus, when you address the labor organization, obviously that's our main objective. However, when you observe the climate debate here, people coming to the COP, they said, "Oh no, everything will be distracted by the geopolitical context." And in fact, it's the contrary. I was arguing. I was saying, no. The beauty of it is climate policy becomes geopolitical, and it's many items are around jobs. Like the U.S. administration won their elections promising 10 million new jobs, good jobs, in the Green New Deal, which is similar to the European deal that they promoted. No, so China produces the majority of solar panels. It's a huge job creation. 8 million jobs in China alone in renewable energies. No, so it's becoming an advantage for countries to move fast in this energy transition, and it shapes the landscape of the industry. No, so think of the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. No, they now requiring local content for electric car manufacturing. Why? Because they see it as a job creation potential. No, so you're mixing climate policies with geopolitics, but eventually what it comes down to is economic development and job creation in those industries. Maybe because you asked about the job numbers, it is very different by country. So what is important to understand is that each and every economic country's structure is different. The developed world now is very much looking into this high-end technology. But when you think of the developing world, and you're alluding to that, think of Africa, or think of a particular case, Nigeria. It's called a petrostate. However, 25 million households, notably women, depend with their jobs on wood collection and charcoal. So it is not only that they're responsible for energy, but they are depending for their income on collecting wood, producing charcoal to sell small on the market, as well as cooking a meal at home. No? So these 25 million jobs that are attached to charcoal production in Nigeria, they can benefit from a transition towards cleaner cooking opportunities, rather than gathering just wood in dirty activities and suffering the smoke that you had mentioned. There are real opportunities to gain for clean cooking alternatives, tree planting, linking it to reforestation, increased agricultural productivity. So in the developing world, depending on biofuels, there's huge market opportunity for job creation in modern and clean energy.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned that climate policy and industrial policy and creating jobs are now totally interlinked. And we see that the same way in Europe. And just to mention some of the findings of Solar Power Europe's latest jobs report on solar jobs, obviously. So today, as of 2021, there are 470,000 jobs created by the solar industry in Europe. And we see that with the new objectives put forward by the European Commission, which is 750 gigawatt of installed capacity, DC installed capacity by 2030, we would be able to increase the number of jobs maintained by the solar industry to 1 million, to over 1 million. But we think at Solar Power Europe that even 1 terawatt of installed capacity would be possible by 2030, and that would result in 1.5 million jobs. So here we really see the opportunities and also the differences between the different scenarios when it comes to job creation. But sorry, I would like to give the word back to you and ask you about how you think cities can incentivize creating green jobs through the energy transition.
Yeah, I think it's again a first to assess what are the opportunities. I think with C40 we did a couple of assessments, because it's not each and every country which is different, but each and every city is different. No, think of Delhi, that is completely different from what we've seen in Austin or New York. No, so each and every city has a different economic structure on where to base the policy on. No, so once you analyze where job opportunities can be created, and there's obviously no surprise that it is in energy production, but it's very much also in construction and refurbishment. So if you do look at your building stock and you see the emissions, we know that construction is very locally happening. No, so construction is not an industry which you basically import, but it needs to happen locally. No, so when you refurbish the building stock in cities, be it public buildings, through public procurement or incentivizing private investments into refurbishment, is a massive job creation potential. No? But then you may have linked industries, like you mentioned, the solar panels, which could be at the same time put on top of it, which adds another maintenance and operation potential for jobs. So assessing each and every sector opportunity for jobs based on the structure of the cities will allow you to target your policies better. So another case in point is obviously transport. Public transport is a massive job creator. No, Metro Paris, we know, is one of the biggest employers. Many think that it is a cost to a city, but if you include the indirect jobs that are, for example, if you buy a croissant in a metro, that is an indirect job. Whereas if you go by car, you may not consume on the way to it. And if you include the induced jobs, which means the salary that the workers gain from working in their direct or indirect jobs, they spend it on cinema, they spend on other things. So obviously from a business perspective, they always argue it's a high cost, but if you look at it from a macroeconomic perspective, from a city perspective, it is a massive potential for economic development, also job creation. So a thorough analysis allows you to target specifically certain sectors of the economy depending on what you promote. Maybe last example is the move towards electric vehicles. I think charging points seems to be a bottleneck. No, so every car manufacturer has its targets by now, 2035, only production of electric vehicles. But if you don't have the charging points in cities, at private households, in compounds with apartments, then where would they charge their car? No, so I think all these type of very local policies need to be assessed first to target a policy to allow this transition to accelerate.
Thank you very much, Marek. And I would also like to thank Alicia and Jutta for being part of this panel today. I'm afraid we've reached the end of our time for this first panel discussion. So I'd like to invite the audience to join me in applauding our panelists. And with this, I would like to hand the word back to Cassie. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panel. You having a quick photo first? Who can resist a quick photo? I thought that was a fantastic panel, really describing what a good and just energy transition looks like, with lots of examples of things that can be shared and scaled across cities, across countries, but also recognizing the differences and the need for kind of bespoke assessments. I also definitely agreed with Marek's point that the main push for walking, cycling and public transport is the fact you can get a croissant on the way and you can't do that while you're driving. So yeah, a big encouragement for that. So a huge thanks for our panel, and they're looking lovely in their photograph. So I'm now delighted to moderate our second and final panel of today's session, which is really going to focus on urban best practice, the barriers and opportunities to actually facilitate a just urban energy transition. So I'm going to welcome my speakers to the stage, please. So we have Fatima Denton, the Director of the United Nations University Institute for Natural Resources in Africa. Please come and take a seat, Fatima. We have joining us virtually Dr. Jorge Rivera Staff, who is the Secretary of Energy in Panama. I'm hoping, Dr. Rivera, you can hear us, and we'll see you in a second. We have Lauren Faber O'Connor, Chief Sustainability Officer from Los Angeles. Hello, Lauren, great to see you. And Eric Scotto, the CEO of Akuo Energy. So thanks, everyone. Please join me and make yourselves comfortable. Tell you what, you're moderating here, you're being a bouncer and security for the previous panel. It's all happening. So a big thank you to everyone for joining me. Fatima, I'm gonna come to you first for a question. So as one of the authors of the IPCC report, you know the science tells us that we need to move much faster. How can this be done in African cities and nations while protecting residents from the high energy costs that we've been talking about today?
Thank you very much. Yes, certainly there's a word that's used quite a lot in the IPCC report, and that's the word acceleration. However, I think some countries might need to accelerate further, and much more than others. The situation, I guess, with cities, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, cities do have the potential to help us reset our development and growth, I'd say, strategy and planning, because they're a major cause of emissions, especially with African cities. We're seeing African cities are becoming more and more dense. They're mega cities. And because of the fact that there are other problems that are related to structural inequities, cities are very often rapidly urbanizing. That urbanization doesn't often come with good planning, good urban management. And so there's a lot of pressure on energy systems, on food systems, water systems, you know. So when you add climate stresses on top of this, it becomes quite difficult to manage, you know, the cities and to be able to plan towards low carbon development. That said, I believe that Africa does have a huge potential to lead the world. I mean, it's a bold statement to make, but I do believe that because it's not more or less restricted because of our lock-in emissions, you know, Africa doesn't have that problem of locked-in infrastructure and emissions. It does have the potential to start properly. And starting properly means that it can perhaps leapfrog technologies, dirty technologies. That's already a big asset there. We also know that much of the demand for energy is going to come from the global south. And Africa is already home to a lot of renewable energy resources. And it's already home to some of the critical green rare earth minerals that are going to be critical for the deployment of renewable energy. So there are a number of aces, I'd say, that we can exploit. The other thing is that Africa doesn't need to industrialize in the same manner as other countries have done. So it can go towards green industrialization, which means less intensity of material use, but also it can create jobs through green industrialization. Because there's this path dependency on, I would say, fossil fuels, many African countries would have to wake up to the potential eventuality of stranded assets. That is already a huge pressure because there's quite a number of revenue coming from that. But in addition to the revenue, there's also the fact that, you know, many African countries are faced with these exogenous shocks, especially because of price volatility, demand in energy, etc. It means that the currency of many hydrocarbon-rich countries does, face depreciation. So that in itself is really making their economies even more fragile. So I'll say to a large extent there are possibilities and ways for Africa to avoid the sort of carbon trap that other countries in Europe have faced. And because it has a lot to demonstrate, this is the continent that might probably lead the world into a post-carbon future without, basically without fossil fuel. You know, there's all to gain. You know, there's all to gain. I mean, if you take the area of energy, for instance, the acceleration has to happen so fast to enable, for instance, there was a lady talking about the gender issue there. I mean, a lot of women rely on biomass energy. So there are possibilities for clean cooking. And many of the, many countries in Africa and many women in Africa have been more or less gridlocked on biomass. So how they move on the energy ladder is important. And so that's why I'm saying that the transition has to happen, but some countries would have to move a lot faster. We can't expect an overnight transition, or we cannot place too high a mitigation burden on countries that do not have the resources to do so. You know, so cities do have a tremendous advantage for, I'd say, 5 things very quickly because I have to rush. A tremendous opportunity for how we democratize energy use. And democratization is important because we're talking about it, but very often many countries in Africa feel that it's not sufficiently inclusive, right? Secondly, I would say how we digitalize energy use, and it's not all about energy, that point was made also. The transition has to happen in sectors like agriculture, transport, etc., especially the hard-to-abate sectors. So digitalization is important. We need smart grids, smart cities, and we can't have that without digital technologies. Democratization is important because, you know, the rural population do face a great deal of energy poverty, but we also have to expand that to urban citizens as well. I would say decentralization is also important because, you know, we need to focus on both rural and energy. There's a lot of migration from rural areas to urban areas, and that's also putting a lot of pressure on energy systems and food systems. So those things would have to happen. What I think it's important to mention, in as much as we have an advantage or an opportunity with cities, we can't basically aspire to a just transition in a way that green transition becomes the enemy of the just. You know, we really have to make sure that we're taking people along with us, that we're more inclusive in terms of how we do this, that we're not asking countries that have not contributed to the historical emissions to you know, pay a higher burden, especially a burden that goes beyond their capacity, you know, beyond the time scope that they can manage, beyond the infrastructure that they can mobilize, and also beyond the resources, because all of these things that I'm talking about certainly cannot happen without, you know, energy justice, without climate finance, and without the infrastructural support that would enable countries to move faster.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Fatima. And I think this whole session and everybody here would totally agree that we really need to put a just transition at the heart. So I am also going to excuse you from this panel when you need to go, because I know you've also got a clashing engagement, but I really appreciate your insights. So thank you very, very much. So I would now like to hand over to Dr. Rivera. I'm hoping you can hear us okay and speak. Let me just do a quick mic check with you, Dr. Rivera. Are you there? Not quite. Okay, we can't quite hear you. Just try once more. Okay, Not quite working, Dr. Rivera. We're going to work on that, and I'm just going to put Lauren on the spot just while we're working on that. I'm going to come straight back to you afterwards. So Lauren, thanks so much for joining us. You'll remember this date well, but in April 2021, the LA 100 study was launched, our groundbreaking study, that found that rooftop solar was going to play a key role in creating local clean energy in LA. So, what's happening now? How are you encouraging the uptake of this technology and putting it at the heart of your Green New Deal? You need just press it.
Thank you. Well, you can definitely hear me. Okay. Won't suffer that problem. So we didn't just launch the report. We published it. This had been the product of 3+ years of working with the federal government, with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, which is the premier renewable energy experts of the country, working with the city of Los Angeles to figure out, if and how we can move our grid to a 100% zero carbon grid. And we mean it when we say that in Los Angeles, because in LA, we own and operate the largest municipal electric utility in the country, and it is a utility that is what is called vertically integrated, which is different from the other utilities, at least in the state of California, which means that we own the generation assets, so the wind, the solar, the geothermal, the hydro, that run our system, the gas, and currently the coal as well. And we own and run the transmission lines, the distribution lines. We distribute, directly to customers. We also operate the grid, also different from the rest of California. We operate the grid of Los Angeles. So when it means we're delivering zero carbon energy 100%, 100% of the time, we are doing literally that. We are not buying from another utility that is, redirecting their renewables to one city versus another. We really are kind of a microcosm of what that needs to look like globally. So we set out to try to answer this question. And what we found was, and honestly, no one really knew what we were going to find at the other side of this, but we worked with a group of stakeholders, a couple dozen members of the Los Angeles community who are either large customers of the utility, disadvantaged community representatives, environmental groups, ratepayer advocates, labor unions, all coming together to say, what do we want, business groups, what do we want this study to actually inform us on? What are the things that we value the most, the answers that we need to get out of this study? So it was really formed and generated, the scenarios of what were we actually going to study were formed by the Los Angeles greater community itself that stuck with us for 3.5 years. And so at the end of that, in April, what did we find was that reaching a 100% renewable energy grid is indeed achievable, sort of question number one, and that grid can be affordable and reliable at the same time. So dispelling the myth that even if you could technically get there, which was always a question, could you really afford the electricity that would be coming from such a clean grid, and would it really be reliable? So what we learned, though, is that the portfolio of energy resources is what's so important. That yes, rooftop solar plays an important role, which I think we kind of knew coming into that. We understand both from a local jobs, a local air pollution improvement, and really being able to help moderate the peaks and valleys of energy consumption throughout the day. Rooftop solar is a really important piece of it. But actually it is truly the diversity of resources, large, small, geographic diversity, type, solar in the middle of the day, wind at night, solar in one part of the country plus another part of the country, the entire western United States being reformed to share these resources. When hydropower is plentiful in one part of the northwest of the United States, that they can sell their power back to us and vice versa. So this regionalization, it really showed how important that portfolio is. And so it was really exciting to see, and again, reinforcing the role of the local resources within the city to really help with the local economics of empowering individuals, households, businesses with their ability to manage their own electricity load, but how that interacts with the utility, how that interacts with the grid. So that's what we found, and now what we're working on as a result of this study, by the way, we accelerated our zero carbon grid goal by 10 years. So it told us not only can we get there, but we can actually get there 10 years earlier than we thought we could. So we moved from a 2045 goal that we set in 2019 to 2 years later accelerating that to 2035. And now the next piece of the process is designing implementation in an equitable way. So we've launched the LA 100 equity strategies. And that's really about, we understand the pathway now. What are the programs to get there that are informed by and benefit our local communities?
That's really fantastic to hear, Lauren. Thank you for taking us through the study and also how it has informed and led to implementation already and those change of goals. It's really, really fantastic. So I'm going to go back to Dr. Rivera and I'm going to go with the question and then hope that we sort out the, the sound. Dr. Rivera, in 2020, Panama adopted a plan that puts the energy transition as a key driver for the country's post-COVID economic recovery and growth. I see that the plan identifies inclusion, justice, and ensuring universal access to electricity as a key priority. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the government is going about this and the concrete steps that are being taken?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Great. We're so pleased.
Thank you, Casey. Pleasure to be here and to share some of the work we're doing here in Panama, even though I'm talking from a national level and we're gonna a C40 event. I would say that, you know, Panama, the whole country has 4 million people, the population. It will be a smaller population than most of the cities that are part of the C40 initiative. So we're working hard as a country in our climate and energy initiatives, as you mentioned. I want to say that Panama is not aiming to be carbon neutral or carbon negative in the next years. We already are carbon negative country. So we want to strengthen that and to go further on the process that we are working to be and to keep carbon negative. We have around 80% of our energy generation in the electricity matrix coming from renewables. Some months of this year, we have been around up of 95% of our energy electricity generation coming from renewables. So it makes a lot of sense to expand that by the electrification process of the economy, of the activities, using these renewable resources that we already have in our electricity matrix. So, of course, we have, as a developing country in Latin America, we have some challenges, and one of them is to close the electricity gap. Still, we have 5% of our population that doesn't have electricity right now, mostly in our indigenous and mountains and forests. That's the last mile that is very difficult in order to resources, etc., to get there. So we have a specific strategy for that within our energy transition agenda, because it's not only about to be a cleaner energy matrix, but also a just and equitable one. So we are putting that on the center of the social initiatives within this energy transition agenda to close the gap. Of course, we have a gender and energy nexus roadmap also in order to fulfill these opportunities for women, and of course with youth and the labor issues that we have to settle in order to continue the process, not only on a technology-based approach, but also on a people-centered, a transition in the next years. And within this, we expect to have two major. We have the diagnosis of that, and we are prioritizing that. The two key challenges. The first one is resources, money. More than the fiscal pressures that we have from the impact of the COVID and the economic inflation, etc. This year, we are aiming to develop new ways of financial mechanisms to close the energy access gap, but also to have the opportunity to be more efficiency and to be more accurate on the way we are doing things, because if we don't do that, we keep continue doing the things that we have been doing until now. Our energy gap for access will not be closed in 2030, as we have established as a goal, aligned with the SDG 7 objectives, but it will be in 2039. So we have to do things differently, and in order to establish the resources, and of course the business models, the regulatory and the policy framework that we have to change in order to fulfill that. No?
Fantastic. That's really great to hear, Dr. Rivera, and great to hear the focus on closing the gap on energy access, but also you bringing up that gender and energy nexus as well that we heard so much about in our previous panel. So we've heard about the regional approach from Fatima, the city approach from Lauren, the country approach from Dr. Rivera. So, Eric, private sector, it's over to you. We know that collaboration between the public and private sector is needed to meet our goals. So how, in your role as CEO of ITUC Energy, are you doing that, and how are you seeing cities leading the way?
That's a very interesting panel, and I'm glad you came, because you're introducing exactly what I was going to talk about. Is of course, the first thing, we need the city to realize that it's absolutely necessary to go in that direction, and it's exactly what you explained previously. But being said that, it's not that easy. It's not that easy because cities, they have been up and running for a long time in most of the places of the world, and sometimes, let's say in Europe, for example, it's 100 years of development. So there is an history, and comes the regulation. It's great to install a solar panel on roofs, but are we allowed to do it? Do we have the right in a restricted area, nearby a church, nearby a monument, to do it? In the last past years, in the last decades, it was not possible. If you wanted to go to change something, aesthetically talking, in this type of area, you were not allowed to do it. 20 years ago, we started to realize that if we wanted to meet the target, unfortunately it took us a long time, but we needed to use the roof in a populated area, in dense area, to produce energy in order to be carbon neutral. Most of the studies in Europe, for example, says that we could produce 15% of electricity needs in Europe thanks to the roofs. That's impressive. How can we do that? Not simply by installing solar panel on roofs. So in 2006, we had an idea, 16 years ago. And the idea was, what if we were creating a product which will give the possibility to the roofer to install it easily, to walk on it, a product that will produce energy and will meet the aesthetic criteria. So that was the dream. Was a little bit a secret. We installed that in a farm far away in the middle of Switzerland, just to keep the secret. And in 2008, we built the largest roof ever in a city of Perpignan, in south of France, 82,000 square meters, 9 megawatts. And since 2008, we are fulfilling the needs of 15% of the consumption of the city. So it works. So we said to ourselves, great, everybody's going to understand and follow the example. But that was 14 years ago. And at the end of the day, it was probably a little bit early. And today, when I'm hearing what I heard in this panel and what we're hearing all over the place, what we're hearing since the 22nd of February, the geopolitical problem we are facing in Europe, we are realizing that we need to accelerate. So now it's time really to deploy this type of product, which is a solar tile. It's a tile. It's a building integrated product. Maybe you can show it on the screen. Otherwise, I'm going to be talking about something very, yeah, that's it. That's some example. It's a tile. It's not a panel you put on the roof. It's the roof. You can jump on it. If there is a strong climate problem like hail, it will be resisting. In most of the cities, there's a lot of architects, they say, no, I don't want to install solar panel because of the climate change. It will be destroyed. We have an episode of hail during the years. This is resisting to hail. Why it took us so long time? Because there was no market. We were alone on the planet developing this product. But thanks God, 5 years ago, there was a man in California who had a brilliant idea, who found that solar tile will be the future. And his name is Elon Musk. So if Elon Musk says solar tiles is great, the entire planet thinks it's great. So Elon Musk started to advertise about solar tiles. And that was the regeneration of our products, the renewal of our product, because suddenly we had a market. So the other idea we had was to show that our product is reliable, because we have 14 years track records. The architects, they know how to install it now, and they want to push for this product. So we had the idea to compete with Elon Musk, not because we like competition, simply because we offer him the possibility to distribute the product in the States. He preferred to do his own product, so we had the idea to compete in California. And we compete on the roof of a big company based in Mountain View called Google. And we won. So we just installed Dragon Scale, which is based on this product. So this is a story to say that when the timing is coming, and the timing is now, you see church, individual houses. The funny project you see there is the French pavilion last year in Expo in Dubai. That was just to be sure that when Thomas Pesquet from the sky took the picture, you could feel that's the color of the Monet painting Nymphaea. That was the idea. So we can do a lot. It's fun, it's reliable, it's producing like a panel, it's a dual glass, it's easy to manufacture anywhere in the world now. And I hope all the cities will have one solution. We'll find other solutions, but if we want to densify the production of solar roof, in some cases we need to respect the history and the aesthetic aspect. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eric, and it's great to hear such innovation and at scale. So we're rapidly running out of time, so Lauren and Dr. Rivera, I'm going to come to you for your final reflections. Lauren, I'm going to give you one of those questions. It's like, in one action, can you tell me, what do you think is the number one thing that cities can do within their powers to accelerate a good and just energy transition?
No small feat. I don't think I'm going to give you something that is incredibly mind-blowing here, but I think that from an actual implementation on the ground and being able to deploy solutions that people want, that they then want to hold their elected officials accountable over time for these solutions, it is really about the engagement process that you undertake and the time that you spend with stakeholders of all kinds in advance to actually advance the right solutions. And I know that isn't like a new technology, or a policy itself that everyone has to, because every city's different. So that answer might be different for different cities. But what we all need to do is engage our stakeholders, engage our citizenry, engage the private sector who want to see government as a partner and see government as a trusted force looking after their needs. And if you put forward policies and solutions that they are not familiar with, don't know how they landed there, or what's going to happen once they adopt, then you don't get the enduring solution that you need to actually solve the problem. So I would say that process piece is the solution, is a step that we all have to prioritize.
No, I totally agree. It's often an overlooked or rushed over step, which is so crucial. And Dr. Rivera, would you concur with that from your perspective, from a country perspective? Is there anything you would like to add as the one action that should be focused on?
Completely agree with what you have mentioned, to have a clear sense of purpose, a roadmap to fulfill that purpose with the engagement of the key stakeholders, and to raise the awareness and the education and the sense of urgency of the things that we have to fulfill to get our goals done.
Well, thank you so much, and a big thank you to all of the panel. I really appreciate your time and insights today. It's really given us a lot of food for thought and a lot on action. Thank you very much. So just to close our session today, I think we've summarized that our current global energy market is really set up to be unfair. Many of our people around the world don't have access to clean fuels for heating, for cooking, while excess profits are being recorded. And I think we've really heard today the need to put an emphasis on a just and equitable transition to get fossil fuels off the system and ensure that everybody's bought in to the solutions. I think we've showed that cities are the doers, cities are leading the way with lots of great action, although we've really heard fantastic inspiration from governments and from technology providers today. A quick plug for tomorrow being Solutions Day here at COP27 and the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action. C40 joins a number of other urban networks as a key supporter of the COP27 presidency-led SURGE initiative, all around sustainable cities. And so I think we can all agree, because I'm closing, so I can say we can all agree when it's my opinion, that if you really want solutions that are ready to go, then you should invest in city-led action. Huge thanks for everybody attending today. Big thank you to our partners and organizers. It was C40, CAF, Solar Power Europe, and the Climate Crisis Advisory Group. And a massive thank you to all of our speakers today. Thank you.